The fluorescent lights hum. A stretcher moves fast down the hallway. On it, a woman, 68 years old. Eyes half open, lips moving. The paramedic leans down to hear her. She isn't calling for a doctor. She isn't calling for her daughter. She is whispering a child's name, over and over and over. Her grandson is 8 years old. He was sitting in his grandmother's living room when everything started. He didn't understand contracts. He didn't understand estate law. He didn't understand what the adults around him had been quietly doing for months. But he understood one thing, and the 3 words he whispered to her, in a house full of people who were supposed to love her, were the only reason she was still breathing. This is her story. And by the end of it, nothing about what you just saw will look the way it looks right now. There is a particular kind of betrayal that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with raised voices or broken dishes or slammed doors. It arrives slowly, quietly. It wears the face of someone you love, speaks in a voice you have trusted your entire life, and moves through your home like it belongs there, because for a long time it did. This is not a story about a stranger. This is not a story about a con artist who knocked on a door and said the wrong thing at the wrong time. This is a story about a family, about a mother and a daughter who once shared Sunday dinners, grocery runs, and birthday candles, about a marriage and the financial pressure that can quietly warp the people inside it, and about how, when everything was finally unraveling at the edges, the only person who saw it clearly was a boy who hadn't yet learned to look away. Her name is Evelyn Carter. She was 68 years old when this story reached its crisis point, though the story itself had been building for years before anyone recognized it as a story at all. Evelyn was a retired school administrator from Atlanta, Georgia. She had spent 31 years working in public education, 12 as a classroom teacher and 19 in administration, overseeing curriculum development for a district that served over 14,000 students. She was not a woman who missed details. She was not a woman who signed things without reading them. She was not, by any measure, the kind of person you would expect to find herself in a hospital bed at 68, her estate partially transferred out of her name, and her body quietly compromised by something she had been consuming every single morning for months, without knowing what it was. And yet, that is exactly where she ended up. To understand how Evelyn Carter arrived in that hospital corridor, you have to go back much further than the documents she signed at her kitchen table. You have to go back to the woman she was before her husband died, before her daughter moved back home, before a man named Raymond Holloway entered the picture and started making himself comfortable in conversations that had nothing to do with him. You have to understand what Evelyn built, because what she built is the reason any of this happened in the first place. People do not go to this kind of trouble over nothing. They go to this kind of trouble over something worth taking. And what Evelyn Carter had built over 68 years of careful, disciplined living was absolutely worth taking. Evelyn grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, the second of 4 children in a household that ran on discipline and intention. Her father worked at a steel plant for 27 years. Her mother cleaned houses for a doctor's family on the north side of town and used part of that money every month, without fail, to put something away. Not much, but something. Evelyn watched her mother do this her entire childhood, and she never forgot it. She went to college on a partial scholarship and a federal loan, graduated with a degree in education, and took her first teaching job at 22 years old in a school where half the desks were held together with electrical tape. She taught there for 6 years before the Atlanta School District recruited her, and she moved south with her husband, Gerald Carter, a man she had married at 24 and loved without reservation for the 39 years they had together before a heart attack took him from her on a Tuesday morning in October, 4 years before this story ends. Gerald and Evelyn Carter had one child, a daughter named Denise, born in 1983. Denise grew up in a house that felt like warmth. Evelyn cooked every Sunday. Gerald coached Denise's youth soccer team for 4 years, and the 3 of them took a road trip every summer without exception. Even in the years when money was tight, even when tight meant choosing between the road trip and the new refrigerator. Denise was bright and social and a little restless, the kind of child who always seemed to be reaching for something just beyond the frame. She went to college in Tennessee, studied business, graduated, and eventually married a man named Raymond Holloway in 2009. Raymond sold commercial insurance. He drove a nice car. He had a firm handshake and a practiced smile, and he always looked you directly in the eyes when he shook your hand which some people experience as confidence and other people, if they are paying close attention, experience as performance. Evelyn never said she disliked Raymond. She would be careful about that, even years later, even after everything. What she would say is that she never felt entirely at ease around him, that there was something in the way he spoke about money, not recklessly, not obviously, but with a kind of hunger that she recognized from experience, having spent decades working in environments where budget decisions revealed character. She did not say any of this to Denise. She told herself she was being a mother-in-law, which is to say, she told herself she was being unfair. She let it go. She folded it away somewhere quiet, and she focused on the fact that her daughter seemed happy, and that was what mattered. For a while, it was enough. Denise and Raymond settled in Charlotte, North Carolina, and built what looked from the outside like a comfortable life. They had a son in 2015, a boy they named Jordan, and Evelyn drove up to Charlotte the day he was born and held him in her arms and felt something she had not felt since. Gerald died, the specific, uncomplicated joy of a new beginning. Jordan became the axis of Evelyn's emotional world in the years after Gerald's death. She drove to Charlotte 6 times a year. She kept a room in her Atlanta home made up for his visits. She called him every Thursday at 6 in the evening, and he answered every time. Even as a toddler, even when answering meant pressing the green button on his mother's phone and holding it up to his ear and saying, "He grandma," with the unself-conscious directness that only very small children have. He was, in every meaningful sense, the best part of what remained of her family. And that is important. That detail, the Thursday calls, the room kept ready. The axis, that detail is not decorative, it is load-bearing. Hold on to it. Before we go any further, if you are watching this from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, or Australia, drop a comment right now and let us know where you are watching from. We love hearing from our community, and we read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it now. We cover stories exactly like this one, stories that stay with you, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Now, let us talk about Raymond Holloway, because while Evelyn was building a relationship with her grandson, and while Gerald's death was slowly reshaping the emotional geography of her life, Raymond was having problems. Not catastrophic problems, not immediately, but the kind of slow-building financial pressure that finds its way into a marriage, like water finds its way through concrete, patiently, persistently, until something gives. The commercial insurance business Raymond had built was not growing the way he had projected. 2 of his largest accounts left for a competitor in the same quarter. A third stopped renewing. Raymond took out a business loan and restructured, but the restructuring cost more than he had estimated. And by 2019, 4 years before Evelyn's collapse, the Holloway household was quietly hemorrhaging money in a way that Denise understood more fully than Raymond knew she did. Denise had her MBA. She could read a balance sheet. She knew what the numbers meant. And in the winter of 2019, sitting at the kitchen table in Charlotte after Jordan had gone to bed, she looked at the numbers, and she understood something she was not yet ready to say out loud. They were not going to be able to sustain this life. Not on their current trajectory. Not without something changing. She thought about selling the house. She thought about Raymond finding a salaried position. She thought about a lot of things. And then, in the way that human beings sometimes do when the honest answer is too hard to hold, she began thinking about her mother, about Atlanta, about the house Evelyn owned outright, a 4-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood that had appreciated considerably in the 22 years since. Gerald and Evelyn had bought it, about the pension, about the savings account she had helped Evelyn organize 2 Christmases ago and had seen the balance of by accident or something close to accident. She did not make a decision that winter, at least not one she would have called a decision. What she made was a series of smaller adjustments that, taken individually, looked like love. She called her mother more. She suggested they spend more time in Atlanta. She told Evelyn that Charlotte felt less like home every year, which was true in the way that convenient truths are true, not entirely false, but selected for a purpose. And Evelyn, who was grieving and who loved her daughter and who missed having family nearby, welcomed all of it. By the spring of 2020, Denise and Raymond had sold their Charlotte house and moved into a rental apartment 20 minutes from Evelyn's home in Atlanta. They told Evelyn it was about being closer to family. They told themselves the same thing, and for a while perhaps it was. But Raymond had moved to Atlanta with a plan that Denise had not fully signed on to, or had not fully admitted to herself that she was signing on to, and that distinction between what Denise knew and when she knew it and how much she allowed herself to know would become one of the most contested questions in the entire investigation. Let us be precise about the timeline, because the timeline is everything in a case like this. According to records later obtained by investigators, Raymond Holloway made his first contact with a private estate planning attorney, not Evelyn, longtime attorney, a man named Harold Simmons, who had handled the Carter family's legal affairs for 16 years. In August of 2021, Raymond did not tell Evelyn about this. He did not tell Denise, at least not at first. The attorney he contacted, a man who operated out of a one-room office in a strip mall in Decatur, Georgia, specialized in what his website described as estate transition for blended families. What that meant in practice, investigators would later determine, was that he had a history of drawing up documents that transferred assets quickly, quietly, and with minimal scrutiny of whether the primary party, the person whose assets were being transferred, had given meaningful, informed consent. His name was Gordon Pruitt. He had a law license and a respectable-looking letterhead and a manner that people consistently described as professional and reassuring. He had also, in a previous case in Macon, Georgia, been the subject of a bar complaint that was ultimately dismissed on procedural grounds. Raymond Holloway found him on the internet. The first document Gordon Pruitt prepared was an amendment to Evelyn Carter's durable power of attorney. The existing document, drafted by Harold Simmons in 2017, gave Gerald Carter the power of attorney, and after Gerald's death, it had lapsed into a holding pattern, legally speaking, because Evelyn had not yet designated a new agent. Pruitt's amendment designated Denise as Evelyn's financial agent, with full authority over her accounts, her real property, and her healthcare decisions. This was not, on its face, unusual. Adult children frequently hold power of attorney for aging parents. What was unusual was the process by which Evelyn came to sign it. According to Evelyn's own account, Denise presented the document to her on a Sunday afternoon in September of 2021. While Raymond was in the kitchen and Jordan was in the backyard, Denise told her it was a routine update, something Harold Simmons had recommended to ensure everything was in order now that Gerald was gone. Evelyn asked if she should call Harold to confirm. Denise said she had already spoken to Harold and that he had sent over the paperwork. She had not. Harold Simmons would later confirm under oath that he had received no such communication and had drafted no such document. Evelyn signed. She trusted her daughter. She had been trusting her daughter for 38 years. That first document opened a door, and once the door was open, Raymond moved through it with the kind of methodical patience that investigators would later describe as the signature characteristic of this type of fraud. Over the following 8 months, from September 2021 to May 2022, a series of financial changes were made to Evelyn Carter's accounts, her estate plan, and her property records. Her longtime bank accounts were transferred to a new institution where Denise was listed as co-owner. A new financial advisor, a man who turned out to be a former associate of Raymond's from his Charlotte years, was designated as manager of Evelyn's retirement investments. A second document, a beneficiary designation change on Evelyn's life insurance policy, was submitted with Evelyn's signature. And in May of 2022, a property transfer agreement was prepared that, if completed, would have moved the title to Evelyn's Atlanta home into a family trust, a trust in which Raymond Holloway, not Evelyn Carter, held controlling interest. Each of these changes was presented to Evelyn as routine. Each time Denise was present. Each time Evelyn asked questions and received answers that were technically plausible and emotionally reassuring and factually misleading. And each time Evelyn signed. Because she was 67 years old and she had raised a daughter she believed she knew. And the idea that what was actually happening could be what was actually happening was a thought she was not yet capable of forming. But there is something else, something that the documents alone do not capture, something that would only become clear much later. When the toxicology report came back from the hospital lab, Evelyn Carter had not simply been deceived. She had been made easier to deceive. Beginning at some point in late 2021, investigators were unable to pinpoint the exact date. Evelyn had been consuming, without her knowledge, a low-dose sedative compound that had been introduced into the herbal supplement she took each morning with her breakfast. The supplement, a blend of turmeric and ashwagandha that Denise had given her as a birthday gift in October 2021, refilling the bottle from a supply she kept at her own apartment. Contained, in addition to the listed ingredients, a measurable quantity of a compound consistent with a class of mild central nervous system depressants. Not enough to incapacitate, not enough to be obvious, enough to keep the edges soft, enough to make Evelyn a little slower to question, a little quicker to defer, a little more willing to hear Denise say, "It's fine, Mama," and let herself believe it. This is not a detail from a thriller novel. This is what the toxicology report said. This is what prosecutors would later present as evidence. This is what was being done to a 68-year-old woman, a retired school administrator, a grandmother, every single morning for months, in her own kitchen, in a cup of tea her daughter had prepared for her now. Jordan Holloway was 7 years old when his mother moved the family to Atlanta. He turned 8 in March of 2022. He was, by all accounts, a quiet and observant child, not shy, but watchful in the way that some children are watchful, particularly children who grow up in households where the adults carry tension they do not name. He was not what any adult in his life would have described as a perceptive witness to adult affairs. He was a third grader who liked building things with Legos, and who could name every starting Spurs player on the Atlanta roster, and who called his grandmother every Thursday at 6 o'clock because that was what they had always done, and he saw no reason to stop. He was 8 years old. He was not supposed to be the one who saved her, but the adults who were supposed to save her were the ones who were hurting her, and so it fell to him. There is a specific mechanism by which children absorb information that adults in distress cannot process. Adults, when they are afraid or conflicted or complicit, develop what psychologists sometimes call motivated inattention, the practiced ability to not fully register what they are seeing because fully registering it would require them to act on it, and acting on it would cost them something they are not ready to lose. Children do not have this mechanism yet. They see what is in front of them, and they have not yet learned that sometimes seeing clearly is a social ability. Jordan Holloway saw things. He filed them away with the uncomplicated precision of a child who does not yet understand why adults sometimes pretend not to notice what everyone in the room can see. He noticed the way his grandmother seemed slower on some mornings than others. He noticed the way his father talked about Grandma Evelyn's house when he thought Jordan wasn't listening, talked about it the way you talk about something that is almost yours. He noticed the folder on his father's desk labeled with Grandma Evelyn's name and address. He noticed, one afternoon in early June of 2022, that his grandmother's name on the mailbox had been partially obscured by a new label bearing a different name, a trust name, that he could not fully read but knew was different from what had been there before. And then, on a Thursday in late June of 2022, Jordan called his grandmother at 6 o'clock the way he always did. She answered the way she always did, but her voice was different. She sounded far away. She sounded like she was speaking through water. He asked her if she was okay. She said she was fine. She said she had been a little tired. He said okay. He said he loved her. He said he would see her on Sunday, and when he hung up, he sat with the phone in his hand for a moment, in the particular stillness of a child who knows something is wrong and is trying to decide what to do about it. He was 8 years old. He did not know what to do, but he remembered. The following Sunday, Jordan went to Evelyn's house with his parents, the way he did most Sundays. Evelyn seemed better that day, more present, more herself. She made sweet potato pie. She and Jordan sat on the back porch and she showed him how to play a card game that her own mother had taught her when she was young. Raymond and Denise were inside. Jordan could hear them talking, low and fast, the way adults talk when they do not want to be heard. He did not try to listen. He did not need to. He had already heard enough. 3 weeks earlier, at 2 in the morning on a night when he could not sleep and had come downstairs for a glass of water, he had stood in the hallway outside the kitchen and heard his father on the phone. He had heard Raymond's voice, not agitated, not frantic, but quiet in a way that felt wrong, the way a voice gets quiet when the thing being said is too serious for normal volume. He had heard Raymond say, "The old woman has already signed everything. We just need her out of the picture long enough for the transfer to clear." He had stood in the hallway for another moment. Then he had gone back upstairs. He was 8 years old. He did not know what a transfer was. He did not know what clearing meant in a legal context, but he knew what out of the picture meant. He had heard those words before. In a context he understood. and he had understood them here too. 3 weeks after that night, on a Wednesday afternoon in late July of 2022, Evelyn Carter collapsed on the kitchen floor of her Atlanta home. She had been feeling unwell for several days, dizzy in the mornings, exhausted by early afternoon, struggling to track the thread of conversations in a way that frightened her, but that she had been attributing to grief, to aging, to the general indignity of a body that had been doing its best for 68 years. She had mentioned it to Denise. Denise had told her to rest more. She had mentioned it to her neighbor, a woman named Barbara who had lived next door for 11 years. Barbara had told her she should call her doctor. Evelyn had said she would. She had not yet, because Denise had offered to make the appointment for her, and the appointment had somehow not been made. On Wednesday afternoon, Evelyn stood up from her kitchen chair, and the room moved in a way that rooms are not supposed to move. And she reached for the counter and missed it, and she went down. She lay on the kitchen floor for a moment, very still, trying to understand what had just happened to her body. She could not get up. She reached for the counter again. She could not reach it. She lay on the floor of the kitchen she had owned for 22 years. In the house she and Gerald had bought together. And she thought about Gerald, and then she thought about Jordan. She thought about Jordan because it was Wednesday. Tomorrow was Thursday. Jordan would call her at 6 o'clock on Thursday, the way he always did, and she needed to be able to answer. She found her phone on the floor near her, where it had fallen from the counter. Her hands were not cooperating the way she needed them to. She pressed the first name she could navigate to. It was Jordan's contact in her phone because she had been looking at his photograph the hour before. It rang twice. He picked up. He was 8 years old and he was at home, and it was 3:30 in the afternoon. And school had been out for an hour. He heard her voice. He heard what it meant. He did not panic. He said, "Grandma, call 911. 3 words. That is all. 3 words, and then he went to find his mother because he was 8 years old, and that was what he knew to do. But before he went to find his mother, in the 2 or 3 seconds between hanging up the phone and walking toward the door, he made one other decision, a decision that no adult had told him to make, a decision that would, weeks later, become one of the most significant pieces of evidence in the entire case. Denise Holloway received the news of her mother's collapse with a stillness that 2 of the paramedics who were present would later describe, separately and without coordination, as unusual. Not cold, they would both be careful to say that. Not obviously unconcerned, but still in a way that did not match the situation. She rode with Evelyn in the ambulance. She held her mother's hand. She answered the paramedics' questions about Evelyn's medications accurately and completely, with the exception of one category of substance that she did not disclose and that the toxicology screen would identify on its own 3 days later. At the hospital, Denise called Raymond. She called him from the waiting room while her mother was being stabilized, and the conversation was 7 minutes long. The nurse who passed the waiting room twice during that call would later note that Denise appeared to be arguing quietly with whoever was on the other end of the phone. Raymond arrived at the hospital 40 minutes later. He brought Jordan. Jordan sat in the waiting room with his father and held a juice box he did not drink and looked at the floor. At one point, Raymond put his hand on Jordan's shoulder, and Jordan did not move away, but he also did not lean in the way that children lean into comfort when comfort is genuine. He sat very still. He was still holding the juice box. He was thinking. The toxicology screen came back on the 3rd day of Evelyn's hospitalization. The attending physician, a woman named Dr. Patricia Owens, reviewed the results and requested a consultation with the hospital's social work team and separately made a call to the county's Adult Protective Services Division. The results indicated the presence of a sedative compound in Evelyn's system at levels inconsistent with her prescribed medications. Dr. Owens had seen cases like this before, not frequently, but enough to recognize the pattern. She asked Evelyn, alone without family present, whether she was aware of having taken any sedative medication. Evelyn said no. Dr. Owens asked her about the herbal supplement. Evelyn described it. Dr. Owens documented everything. That documentation would form the basis of what became a criminal investigation within 72 hours. Meanwhile, Evelyn's neighbor Barbara had made a phone call of her own. Barbara had been watching the Holloway situation with increasing unease for months. The way Raymond's car was always in Evelyn's driveway, the way Denise's name had appeared on documents Barbara had seen on Evelyn's kitchen table during a visit, The change to the mailbox label that Evelyn hadn't seemed to notice or hadn't thought worth mentioning. Barbara had said nothing because she had told herself it wasn't her business, and because she didn't want to upset Evelyn, and because she kept waiting for something concrete enough to justify the conversation. When Evelyn was taken to the hospital by ambulance, Barbara stopped waiting. She called Harold Simmons, the attorney. Harold Simmons had already months earlier attempted to reach Evelyn after discovering through a routine professional check that his firm had been listed as the secondary contact on an account he had never been involved with. He had called. Denise had answered. Denise had told him Evelyn was resting. He had sent a letter. The letter had arrived at the house and been collected from the mailbox by Raymond. Harold Simmons had assumed his letter had been received and that Evelyn had chosen not to respond. He had not pushed further. He pushed now. What happened next unfolded with the kind of controlled precision that investigators and prosecutors bring to a case when the evidence is clear and the window for intervention is still open. Harold Simmons contacted the Adult Protective Services caseworker assigned to Evelyn's case and provided documentation of the original estate plan, the one Evelyn had actually authorized, alongside records showing the divergence between that plan and what had been filed over the preceding 8 months. The caseworker coordinated with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Investigators pulled financial records. They pulled the property transfer filing. They pulled the beneficiary designation changes. They pulled bank records showing transfers from Evelyn's accounts to a joint account held by Denise and Raymond. They pulled Gordon Pruitt's bar complaint history from Packin and opened a separate inquiry into his role in the document preparation. And then one of the investigators, a woman who had spent 11 years working financial crimes and who had 3 grandchildren of her own, asked a question that nobody had thought to ask yet. She asked, "Is there a child in this household? Was a child present during any of this?" Jordan Holloway was interviewed by a child forensic specialist at a family advocacy center in Atlanta on a Tuesday morning in early August of 2022. He sat across from the specialist in a room that had been designed to feel comfortable and non-institutional, with soft chairs and natural light, and a table with paper and colored pencils on it in case he wanted to draw while he talked. He did not draw. He sat with his hands in his lap, and he answered every question that was asked of him with the steady, deliberate accuracy of a child who had been waiting for an adult to finally ask. He described what he had heard in the kitchen hallway at in the porch. He described the folder on his father's desk. He described the mailbox label. He described the Thursday phone call and the way his grandmother's voice had sounded different. And then he described the other decision he had made. The decision he had made in the 2 or 3 seconds between hanging up from his grandmother's call and going to find his mother. He described it simply, without drama, without fully understanding why it mattered. Before he went to get his mother, he said he had taken a photograph, with his tablet, of the folder on his father's desk, the one with Grandma Evelyn's name on it. He had been meaning to show it to someone. He just hadn't known who to show it to yet. He showed it to the investigator. The folder contained, among other documents, a timeline, a handwritten timeline, in Raymond Holloway's handwriting, mapping out the steps of the asset transfer alongside projected completion dates. It was, in the language of the eventual indictment, evidence of premeditation. Raymond Holloway was arrested on a Thursday. Denise Holloway was not arrested that day, but she was informed that she was the subject of an active investigation and that charges were forthcoming unless she chose to cooperate with prosecutors. She cooperated. The cooperation agreement she signed 3 weeks later described, in detail, a plan that Raymond had brought to her in the spring of 2020, shortly before the move to Atlanta. She said she had refused at first. She said she had told him no. She said the conversation had happened again and again over the course of many months, each time reframed slightly differently. Not as theft, Raymond had always been careful not to use that word, but as financial planning, as responsible stewardship, as protecting Evelyn from her own declining capacity to manage her affairs. Denise said she had eventually stopped saying no, not because she agreed, but because she was afraid. Afraid of what the financial situation would become without intervention, afraid of what Raymond would do if she refused too many times, afraid, in a way she had not fully admitted to herself, of the life she would have to rebuild without the resources she had allowed herself to count on. She said she had not known about the supplement until 3 months before the collapse when she had found the original compound in Raymond's car and confronted him. She said he had told her it was harmless. She said she had wanted to believe him. The prosecution did not find her account fully credible, but they found it useful, and they took what was useful and used it. Gordon Pruitt, the attorney who had drafted the fraudulent documents, surrendered his law license in October of 2022 as part of a negotiated settlement with the State Bar of Georgia. He was separately charged with fraud and conspiracy, and ultimately pled guilty to 2 counts in exchange for a reduced sentence and full cooperation with investigators. His testimony established the precise sequence by which the documents had been prepared and the manner in which Evelyn's signatures had been obtained, through a combination of deception about the document's content and the chronic low-grade impairment that had made her less likely to ask the questions she would otherwise have asked. The financial advisor, the man Raymond had placed in charge of Evelyn's retirement accounts, was charged separately with unlicensed practice and securities fraud. The assets he had managed had not been stolen outright. The transfer had been interrupted before completion, but they had been repositioned in ways that benefited Raymond's business interests, and that would have been extremely difficult to untangle without court intervention. Raymond Holloway went to trial in March of 2023. He was charged with elder financial abuse, criminal administration of a controlled substance, fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and 2 counts of identity theft related to the fraudulent account openings. His attorney argued that Denise had been the primary architect of the plan, that Raymond had been a secondary participant who had not fully understood the legal implications of what was being done, and that the substance in the supplement had been a separate matter entirely, one that Raymond had introduced for reasons he characterized as medical rather than criminal. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 14 years. He will be eligible for parole in 9. Denise Holloway received a sentence of 5 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a restitution order covering the full value of assets moved or encumbered during the scheme. She did not serve prison time. Whether that outcome represents justice is a question that different people in this story answer differently, and it is not a question this story can answer for you. What can be said is that Evelyn Carter was asked about it once by a journalist who covered the sentencing. Evelyn said, "I don't spend time thinking about whether the sentence was enough. I spend time thinking about what I'm going to do with whatever time I have left in the house I paid for myself." The house was fully restored to Evelyn's name in December of 2022. All financial accounts were returned to her sole ownership. The life insurance beneficiary designations were corrected. Harold Simmons, the original attorney, the one who had tried to reach her and been blocked, updated all of her estate documents free of charge. Evelyn hired a new financial advisor, a woman recommended by Barbara, her neighbor who had known Barbara's family for 20 years. She changed the locks on her house. She did not change her phone number, because Jordan still called every Thursday at 6 o'clock. He had never stopped. Not during the investigation. Not during the trial. Not during any of it. Every Thursday, 6 o'clock, the phone rang. Every Thursday, Evelyn answered. Jordan Holloway was 9 years old by the time the trial concluded. He had not testified in open court. His statements were introduced through the forensic specialist report and through the photograph evidence he had provided. His school counselor noted that he seems to be processing the events of the previous year with a maturity that was, in her words, both impressive and a little heartbreaking. He knew at 9 that his father was in prison. He knew in broad strokes what his father had done. He knew that his mother had been involved. He was living by the time of the sentencing with Denise's aunt in Savannah, Georgia, a woman he had met twice before all of this happened, and who was now his primary guardian while Denise completed the terms of her probation. He called Evelyn every Thursday. She called him on his birthday, on Christmas, on the first day of school every year. She drove to Savannah twice that first year to see him. She was not willing to let the actions of his parents become the thing that defined his relationship with her. He was not responsible for what had been done in that house. He had been, in the truest sense, the only person in that house who had tried to stop it. There is a statistic that tends to appear in conversations about elder financial abuse, and it is worth saying out loud because it does not get said loudly enough. More than half of all elder financial abuse cases in the United States are committed by family members, not strangers, not scam callers. Not unknown actors operating at a distance, family members, adult children, spouses, the people whose photographs are on the mantelpiece, the people who have keys to the house, the people who know where the documents are kept and who the attorneys are and how the accounts are structured because they were trusted with that knowledge. In the United States alone, elder financial abuse costs victims an estimated $3 billion each year. That number almost certainly undercounts the reality because the majority of cases are never reported, and the majority of cases that are reported are never prosecuted to the degree that Raymond Holloway's was. Most of them end quietly. Most of them end with the money gone and the family fractured, and the older person sitting in a house they still own or no longer own, trying to reconcile the gap between the person they thought they knew and the person who turned out to be standing in front of them the whole time. Evelyn Carter knows something about that gap. She has had 2 years now to sit with it, to walk around its edges, to look at it from different angles. She has said, in the conversations she has had since the trial, that the hardest part is not the money, and it is not even the physical harm, the months of quiet chemical interference with her own mind. The hardest part is the recalibration, the going back through every memory of every Sunday dinner, every grocery run, every document she signed, and asking herself, was any of it real? Was any of what she believed she had with her daughter real? She does not have a clean answer to that question. She is not sure a clean answer exists. What she has is the house, and her restored accounts, and Harold Simmons, and Barbara next door, and a boy in Savannah who calls her every Thursday at 6 o'clock. That is what remained. That is what held. And sometimes, she has said this, too, sometimes that is enough, not because it should be, but because it is what you have, and you can either build from what you have or you can let what is gone consume what is left. Evelyn Carter has chosen, with the same deliberateness with which she has made every major choice in her life, to build. There is one more thing, one detail that did not come out in the trial, not because it was irrelevant, but because the legal system does not have a category for it. A few weeks after the conviction, Jordan's school counselor in Savannah, a different counselor, a new one, someone who had not been part of any of it, asked Jordan to draw a picture of his family for a class activity. Not a legal document, not a forensic exercise, just a third-grade classroom assignment. Jordan drew Evelyn. He drew her in front of her house in Atlanta. He drew himself standing next to her, taller than he actually was, the way children draw themselves when they want to feel capable. He drew the clock collection in the window. The clocks Evelyn had kept since Gerald died, because Gerald had loved clocks. Because Gerald had said that a room with a clock in it always felt like someone was paying attention. He labeled the drawing. He wrote, at the bottom, in the uneven handwriting of a 9-year-old, "This is my family." Jordan Holloway knew what the word family meant. He had seen what it could be used to justify. He had also seen what it meant when it was real. He drew Evelyn, not his mother, not his father, Evelyn, and she was smiling. Before this video ends, I want to ask you something. And I want you to think about it before you answer. If you were Evelyn Carter, could you find a way forward? Not forgiveness. That is a different question and a personal one, and nobody gets to answer it for you. But a way forward. A way to take what remained and build from it the way she did. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know. And I want to know where you are watching from, because this community spans every corner of the world, and every time I read those comments, I am reminded why stories like this one need to be told. If this video moved you, if this story stayed with you the way Evelyn's story has stayed with me, subscribe to this channel right now. Every video we make is built the same way, with the same care, the same research, the same commitment to telling the whole truth of a story, not the easy version of it. You do not want to miss what we have coming next. Next time on Depthline Tales, a woman spent 40 years believing her husband had died in a car accident, until a stranger knocked on her door and handed her a photograph. That is all I will say. You will want to be here for it.